You're on your hands and knees deep inside a mountain, and the only light you have is a small flame cupped in your palm. The air is cold and completely still. No wind has touched this place in thousands of years. You crawl forward through a narrow passage, your shoulders scraping stone on both sides, and then the tunnel opens up into a chamber the size of a room. You lift your flame toward the wall. A horse looks back at you, then a lion, then a herd of bison running across the rock as if the stone itself were moving. For 99% of human history, this was normal. People crawled into the deepest, darkest, most dangerous parts of caves, not to live there, but to paint. Today, if you tried to visit some of these chambers, you'd need permits, oxygen monitors, and a guide, because human breath alone is now considered a threat to paintings that are older than the pyramids, older than writing, older than the wheel. So why did people go so far underground to leave a mark that almost no one would ever see? Let's start with where you'd actually find this art. Caves like Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain hold hundreds of images, but the most striking part isn't the horses or the bison. It's the location. The paintings aren't near the cave entrance, where the light is and where people actually slept and cooked. They're deep inside, in chambers you can only reach by crawling, climbing, or squeezing through gaps barely wide enough for a human body. That detail matters more than it seems. Whoever made this art wasn't decorating a living room. They were making a deliberate trip into total darkness, carrying fire, to reach a specific spot. Archaeologist Jean Clottes spent decades studying these caves and became convinced that the location itself was the point. He argued that many of these deep chambers were treated less like galleries and more like thresholds, spots where the wall of the cave was believed to be thin, a boundary between the world of the living and something else entirely. You're not just looking at a horse painted on rock, you're standing where someone believed the rock itself might answer back. That idea sounds strange until you look at how some of the art was actually placed. Painters didn't just pick a flat wall and start. They used the natural bumps, cracks, and curves of the stone to shape the animal. A bulge in the rock becomes a bison's shoulder. A ridge becomes the curve of a horse's back. The wall wasn't a blank canvas. It was already alive with shapes, and the artist's job was to reveal what was hiding inside it. Researcher David Lewis Williams pushed this further with a theory that's still debated today. He proposed that some cave art may have come out of altered states of consciousness, trance-like experiences brought on by rhythmic drumming, chanting, sensory deprivation in total darkness, or extreme exhaustion after a long crawl underground. In these states, the human brain naturally generates geometric patterns, zigzags, dots, spirals, grids, before the mind starts interpreting them as recognizable shapes. And here's the detail that makes this theory hard to dismiss. Those exact geometric patterns show up over and over across caves separated by hundreds of miles and thousands of years. Researcher Genevieve von Petzinger spent years cataloging these marks across dozens of European caves and found something remarkable. There are only about 32 recurring geometric signs, dots, lines, hand shapes, grids, that appear again and again across an enormous span of time and distance. Not random scribbles, a shared visual vocabulary. Sit with that for a second. Groups of people who never met, separated by generations in mountain ranges, kept drawing the same small set of symbols. Something was being communicated. We just don't have the key to translate it. Now, if you're picturing all of this being done by a rugged hunter marking his kills, there's a problem with that image, and it comes from one of the simplest details in these caves: the handprints. Thousands of hand stencils are scattered across cave walls, made by placing a hand flat on the stone and blowing pigment around it. For a long time, people assumed these belonged to adult male hunters marking their trophies. Then anthropologist Dean Snow actually measured them. He compared the ratio of finger lengths, a subtle biological difference between male and female hands, across hundreds of stencils in caves like Pec Merle and El Castillo. His findings suggested that a majority, around 75%, likely belonged to women. That single measurement quietly overturns a story that's been repeated for over a century, which brings us to something you might want to sit with for a moment. If you're enjoying this dive into how much of prehistory we've gotten wrong, hitting subscribe means you won't miss the next one. All right, back into the cave. This wasn't a wall of hunting trophies made by warriors. It looks more like a shared space, one where women, and likely children too, based on smaller handprints found alongside adult ones, were just as present as anyone else. Now picture the scene the way it probably happened. Not one lone genius working in isolation, but a small group crawling into the dark together. Someone holding the fire steady, someone grinding red ochre and black manganese into pigment with water or animal fat, someone tracing a hand on the wall while another blows pigment through a hollow bone. Children watching, maybe pressing their own small hands beside the adults. It wasn't a solitary ritual, it was social, a shared act, repeated across generations in the same caves, sometimes centuries apart, as if each new visitor was adding to a conversation that had already been going on for a very long time. And that reframes the whole question. This wasn't really about art the way we use that word today. There's a strong case that this was about presence, about saying, in the only language available, I was here, we were here, this mattered, which is where the twist gets even stranger. In 2018, researchers Dirk Hoffman and Alistair Pike, working with archaeologist Paul Pettit, used uranium-thorium dating on red pigment and hand stencils in 3 Spanish caves, La Pasiega, Maltravieso, and Ardales, and got a result that shocked a lot of archaeologists. The paintings were at least 64,800 years old. That's over 20,000 years before Homo sapiens is known to have reached that part of Europe. The only humans there at that time were Neanderthals. For decades, Neanderthals were treated as the less capable cousins of our species, incapable of symbolic thought. If this dating holds up, and it's still debated, it means our closest relatives were crawling into dark caves and marking walls before we ever showed up to compete with them for the same ochre and the same stone. Now think about what you actually do today. You take a photo somewhere remarkable and post it. You carve initials into a park bench or a tree. You leave a comment just to be part of the conversation, even when no one will read it years later. None of that is new behavior. It's the same instinct that sent someone crawling through a stone tunnel 60,000 years ago, carrying fire, just to leave a handprint on a wall they knew almost no one would ever see. Not for an audience, not for likes, just for the simple ancient need to be witnessed by something, even if that something was only the mountain itself. That instinct is older than language. It's older than your species if the Spanish caves are right. And every time you leave your own mark on the world, in whatever small way you can, you're doing exactly what someone did in the dark, by firelight, tens of thousands of years before you were born. If this kind of deep dive into prehistory is your thing, there's a lot more where this came from, so make sure you're subscribed before the next one drops.